Hey folks, before we get started, I just want to let you know about my upcoming book, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. If you're looking for a job or you think you might be looking for a job in the future and you're trying to up your mobility and meet new people and things like that, this book walks you through the whole process. Go ahead and check it out. It comes out on November 20th. It'll be on Amazon, and you can find it as The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job.
Welcome to another episode of React Roundup. I am your host for the moment, Thomas Alott, and on the panel today we have Charles Wood.
Hey folks.
And joining us today we have Chris Reyes.
Hey everybody.
And our guest this week is Paul Cowan.
Hi there.
Are you a React developer who builds large applications for your organization? With NX, you can build your apps in a monorepo alongside your backend code and share code between React and other frameworks. You'll also get advanced code generation and automatically configure tooling like Cypress, Jest, and Prettier to simplify your workload. You'll build higher quality apps, share more across teams, and focus less time on configuration. Visit nx.dev/React to get Narwhal's free open source set of extensible dev tools.
So, how did you get involved in React originally? I'd love to hear the origin story.
Right. Well, so even my journey into development, I was a painter and decorator until I was 30. So I'm sort of quite late into the game. I did the .NET stuff, but more and more drawn to the UI side of things and JavaScript heavy applications. Then we had Backbone, and then there was Ember. And Ember was something I worked on for a few years, which it probably is better now. But at the time, I just ran into bug after framework bug, and just the whole model of holding Ember at the time, it might be different now, was all based on observables and computer properties. And it was nearly impossible to sort of keep a mental model in your head of what was triggering. Well, I nearly lost my mind. It was really distressing, the whole thing. And then I heard of the flux pattern. I read about it, and it suddenly made absolute sense that this is the declarative side of React. You're not triggering changes based on other changes. You're updating state, really. It's all state based. The flux, actually flux, and then which became Redux, is state based. So you should be updating state, and your components know how to render themselves based on these state changes. And this was just like a Damascus moment for me. Suddenly programming made sense again. I withdrew my application to Burger King. I was happy to bring some sanity to the sea of observables and computer properties. I wrote my sort of own, because Flux wasn't a framework, it was a pattern. So I rolled that out in an Ember application. It sort of cured the whole. The project was really in trouble. We were spending a lot of time fighting framework bugs, and by using Flux and this notion of passing actions up to a higher level that push state down, it really was enlightening for me that to this day I will always have a soft spot in my heart for Redux and Flux especially, and React was the sort of the only one. There was Angular as well, had the two-way data binding. Ember was all two-way data binding, but React sort of stood on its own with this unique pattern. It sounded daft that you would re-render the whole page, even on the slightest page, with the virtual DOM, but in practice, it really did bring sanity to an absolute chaos.
Yeah, I remember when Jordan first was telling me about, like, well, what if we just re-rendered everything? I was like, nah, you can't do that's insane. But he said, but wait, listen. And you're like, well, maybe. And I'm like, it's never going to get popular. Like, sorry. Here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Redux has sort of gone a bit out of fashion now, mainly due to the boilerplate. Everybody creates their own middleware. So, very, very rarely to have no two Redux projects are basically the same, because we all will end up ruling our own middleware. But you have used Reducer now in the new one of the new hooks that's come out of React. And that's, again, I think the more you think about developing a UI, it really is a sort of a state machine is the sort of the most sane way of visualizing a UI is to be, we change, so the important bits are we send actions, but so an action describes something like added to do, and maybe you'll have some properties in that object to add it to do. But it's not only that, with a state, it's the previous state and the next state and the action all together is sort of what I find fascinating about it. Once it really does it makes a more structured application than imperative code of just even if it is two-way data binding. That I find is a more chaotic application.
Yeah, Paul, I really like the point where you said no two Redux applications are the same. And every time I've used Redux, I have that kind of anxiety where I need to go look and see how I did it last time. And like every time it's a little bit different for the use case. So I want to call out to that point because I've noticed that use reducer kind of remedies that issue because it's a little bit simple implementation. Have you found that use reducers kind of simplified that across applications for you?
So again, I think use reducer it's not for global state. It's more for what we used to call in the old class-based days of React. It's more for component state. Again, I mean, I do see some implementations using the new React context use reducer, but you're going to run into performance problems if you don't take care because every change to the context causes a re-render in React. So it definitely. So with Redux, a lot of stuff ended up in the global state that didn't need to be in the global state. You had like loading states, and everybody had the loading error, and then we had middleware loading blah blah. I mean, there was a pattern in Redux where you would for doing async calls where you had like a async symbol, and that was every project had their own source code of this. But with use reducer, we can stop things going into the global state that just don't need to be in the global state, which purely are for that root component only.
Hooks have been out not for not very long now. I know use reducer is an interesting one. I haven't really seen that one used much like in production yet. At least none of the projects that I've worked on have really kind of taken it to the next level. But we're kind of at an interesting phase now where hooks have been stable now they've been in React core for like a year now, and teams are starting to think about really adopting them. You had a really interesting article where it kind of exposed some of the potential dangers of hooks. I think now is a great time to revisit that and see before everybody, starts just, okay, this is the way to do it. There's so many things that we need to be aware of or be cautious of. Could you give like a brief summary of like some of the points from that?
Yeah, so I wrote a post about frustrations with React hooks, which certainly I found they are strange. There are just a number of gotchas, and the only way to go through these gotchas is to actually do it on a production app. No amount of writing the canonical counter application of a hook is going to expose you to the So number one is that it's just another new paradigm to learn in JavaScript. I mean, you're not going to find this hook implementation anywhere else. One of the things I actually liked about React was we had stateless components where these were pure functions. They take some props and return an HTML element. There's something very beautiful about that. There's not a lot can really go wrong there. So we've gone from that to something where lots of things can go wrong. So we're now introducing state into a function. So we're creating these, this sounds disparaging, sort of a Frankenstein function where I'm trying to think of less sort of controversial word, but the sort of Frankenstein functions are definitely no longer pure because you shouldn't be able to call the same function with the same arguments and something different happens. But if you're unaware, it definitely is very much easy to make this happen. And I think that's the crux is that it's a function and not a class. So a function is going to get called every time. There's no longer any life cycle hooks. And we're trying to somehow post state into these functions. So one of the hooks is the use effect hook, where we like to isolate side effects and have them run after and have them potentially run after each render cycle. And use effect takes a function to be executed to maybe mutate the DOM or maybe update the title of a HTML page. And it also takes a second argument, which is an array of dependencies. And the logic is that if if anything in your callback function is going to refer to any outside scope variables, then they need to be in the dependency array. And this means we're dealing with closures. And I've always had a fear of closures because just weird things happen with closures.
Yeah, it could be really hard to reason about because you got to think about, okay, I mean, even the concept of a closure was really difficult to learn back when I was nerding out about this stuff. But then having to remember, okay, wait, which version of this variable is going to be available in which functions inside of this thing and at what periods in the... It's kind of hard
as
to
it changes. Do I have the old version or the new version, or it changed and now I don't have what I thought I had?
Yeah, it's essentially time travel, but you're not sure what point in history you're going back to. So it's that's kind of
just all the people are wearing funny clothes.
Yeah. But yeah, in the article I want to point out, and something I identified a lot with, was hooks come off as deceptively simple. You know, when they were announced, you read through that article, hooks at a glance, and, you went through the counters. And then when you start working in the real world, they kind of announced it as classes confuse humans and machines. But now we're kind of swapping out the class problem with the closure problem, because I feel like, calling back closures is that classic JavaScript interview question. You hit closure and you kind of start stressing out, and it's a very complex topic. So is that where a lot of the frustration started? Was that like kind of the main drive in this article?
So years ago, I remember thinking I'm going to try and avoid closures as much as I can. I've forgotten what the actual pain point was. But also there's the dependency array. There are just a number of really subtle gotchas with hooks. And this dependency array, where you want the effect to be called when anything changes. Like say you've got the classic count variable. If that count increments, then you want to run the effect again to maybe re-render a label or something. And this dependency array uses object is comparison. So it doesn't do like it. So say you have a function that's being created in each render cycle, or you have a new object each time, then that really sort of blitzes your dependency array because it does object is. So it doesn't check. It doesn't do a deep equality check. So you have an object with a name field. If that object's being recreated each time, but with the same name string, there'll be an inequality check because it's checking on the object reference and not the values of the object. And I see why they're doing this, because you could get it if you start doing a big deep equality check in a deeply nested object, then you're going to have performance problems. But there are a number of libraries now there's use Memo 1 is the one I use. It does a shallow equality check. It doesn't go any deeper than the sort of the first level. But the fact that these exist is another sign it's a gotcha. And there's also a linter for hooks, which checks this dependency array. With ESLint, you can pass a -- fix, switch to ESLint, and it will, if you're developing in VS Code or something, it will actually update the dependency array for you. So that to me is another sign it's nice, but it's also a sign that we shouldn't really need a linter for a new pattern. That's quite worrying. So it is that we actually need external tooling we shouldn't need really external tooling to keep this in the right track. It is very useful. I personally always have it on, and it surprised me that it's actually right more than I am. I probably shouldn't be surprised by this, but it's actually generally right. It just checks that anything in the use effect callback, if you're referencing anything in there that's not in the dependency array, it will add it. But then you get into this problem again with the object is a quality check. If you have objects and functions, which you're going to have at some point, so you either have to spread out your object or use so you're checking on the object properties and not the object itself, or you have to use something like use Memo 1, which does does a shallow equality check. So these are all very subtle things which you won't find out doing your counter example in a code sandbox, but you will certainly come into this if you're on a real production app.
So what do you recommend as far as for individuals trying to up their game or companies trying to, stabilize their code base? What can we do about these things, either to things to avoid or things to keep in mind, or should every individual have to master all these concepts individually? Or
again, to me, it comes down to experience. I don't think some people pointed out in that post. Some people pointed out some good points to me. So I wrote a follow-up called Solutions to Frustrations with React Hooks. One guy actually made a very good point there. Again, he brought back to the declarative nature about React. I got into the problem where the point in the post I made was it was hard to use. A hook they have to be called in the same order, and they have to be called at the start of your functional components. They can't be called, they have to be called in the same order each time because of the way the internal implementation of hooks. So you can't have a hook in an if statement and you can't have a hook in an event handler because then they're not going to be called in the same order each time. But I think that was me. My point was I couldn't work out how to use a hook in an event handler. And I thought, what's the point of hooks if I can't use an event handler? That for something like I use fetch or fetching an API, that to me is the perfect use case for a hook. It'll supply my loading and error states just like Redux used to. But I had to jump through hoops to actually make this work in an event handler. And somebody pointed out again, back to the original point of the declarative nature of React, is to use reducer and just use reducer comes with a dispatch function, which will update the state. So that's what you put that in your event handler, and that brings it back to the declarative nature of React. So you update some state from the dispatch function from use reducer, and then your components how naturally to update themselves because React is a beautiful declarative framework. So I think that is the mindset for me, is to really stick to React's roots, which is we update some state and the components naturally update. We don't imperatively update our components. That was, well, I can't remember the name of the guy. It was the first comment in the original post, but he really put me on the right path by mentioning that. Be declarative. That should be the model when dealing with React.
Yeah, but I think to your point, that all kind of comes back to it's just another paradigm for writing React, because beforehand, when you were thinking about using hooks, I saw your point where it seems like from the event handler, you should be able to just call use fetch, but then you have to maintain that call order. So now you have to kind of have the use reducer as another tool, and there's just so many hooks. And then once you kind of get in the idea of writing custom hooks, that's a whole nother ballgame. So in terms of the custom hooks, did you kind of run into any kind of these issues when you were working in production code?
Yeah, most of them really. Yeah, that was my one, was to create my own use fetch. There's 100 of these things, and my implementation was to create a closure that called the hook. But I think that generally I've changed my opinion somewhat, in that I think that the way of calling use reducer from if we can remember, just if we're updating state, anything outside the hook, the natural hook order, I think just updating state is the correct way to go. It's definitely the best way. And then, this is the way it did happen in React as well. We had component did mount, and we had component did update as well. And we used to sort of check props. So component did mount is when the component is added to the DOM, and component did update is after a render cycle and after props or state has changed in the React component. That was a pretty common pattern, was you compare the previous props to the next props, and maybe you do something. So that to me has all been simplified by hooks. So on the whole, I'm really a lot more positive about them, I think, than I initially was. But I have gone through the pain. That's the thing. I'm trying to think, is there a way to not go through the pain? I guess maybe hooks are more stable now, so you could actually look at some of the popular libraries now. There's the use fetch one. I know I was speaking to one of the guys that wrote that, and he actually changed his code to use reducer in response to the article as well. So that was good to see.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have written their own use fetch or use promise or something like that. And it's good that the React team has come and kind of clarified their opinion on what these things are designed for. And now it's kind of, they're trying to push us to think of it as an anti-pattern to do stuff like use fetch, and to think about handling promises and with concurrent mode and suspense and all that stuff, and kind of separating out the data fetching and promises stuff from the actual rendering of the UI. I think that's going to help in the future, as well as, kind of all of us early adopters who have kind of run full steam ahead and tested the boundaries, especially with articles like yours, where we're starting to see the edges of hooks, and where, like, on the old maps or like Tharby dragons, like don't use hooks for this. Like that's going to be a bad time.
Yeah, I mean, also, what did we have before? I mean, we're still sort of tied to the render cycle. Hook's not going to work outside of render cycle, but we do have a better. I actually hate the React docs. The React docs explanation just calls them. It's a way to store state in React functions about using classes. I think that's a terrible explanation of what a hook is. A hook is for me is a way. It's a nice way of isolating cross-cutting concerns like logging.
Yes.
Authentication. Now, that to me is a much better. I mean, basically, the official docs are saying our classes aren't cool, and basically, let's go with that. But that really undersells it, in my opinion. Like it really is. It's a nice way of isolating cross-cutting concerns compared to before. There was the original mixins with React. Then we had render props, which again was very clunky, or higher order components as well, which you could really. You get lost in if you've ever gone through the dev tools trying to find your component in the sea of connects and with routers. This is definitely better, but it's just unfortunate. There just are some general weirdness, and a lot of that weirdness I think is from closures in general, and trying to juggle with my pain was really down to this dependency array and the object is comparison. There's a lot of things I didn't realize that I now do realize that I'll never do again, but I sort of had to do them first to realize not to do them.
Yeah, I think the whole experience kind of comes back to you kind of had with hooks. Once you start working with it is really where you gain the knowledge of it. And it was a little bit of a painful implementation for me, at least. But then once, I kind of went through those pain points, it made my code a lot better for sure and readable in the long term because when I was trying to use render props and kind of examine that in the console, you would see, you might have like 3 or 4 render prop patterns and you're kind of chasing it through your code, where now you kind of have the opportunity to build more modular functional code that's easier to test. Have you done any kind of testing with hooks or anything, or how's your experience with that?
You mean unit testing?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's the Kent Dodds library, the React, I can't remember what it's called. It's from the React testing library. It's got a hooks library. Again, it's slightly clunky syntax, but it does mean you can test the hooks out. You don't have to have a component to test the hook, which is nice as well. Like so, we are again still tied to the render cycle. So the library sort of mimics that render cycle without having to add an extra hook. But it is nice being able to isolate them much better. I guess the other thing is that we have suspense coming again. This is React changing drastically, and React has sort of won the battle for now. I often wonder, is this the sort of the bit where it goes into we've reached peak oil, and now where the very smart developers who work for React maybe are now trying to boil the ocean.
I think that's a very interesting point that you bring up, because I've seen that time and time again throughout. I've been doing dev stuff since the 90s, and I've seen like every ecosystem seems to get to a certain point and then crash. Like Ruby on Rails started wanting to be everything to everything, and they were very strong opinions in the Ruby on Rails ecosystem about JavaScript, and then there were other platforms. I remember Dojo is like a very you do everything in Dojo or you do everything in Angular. And that's one concern that I think is right to be worried about, of if everything is React, at what point does the framework become too big, or does the ecosystem become too big? And what do you think are the dangers there?
I think, say smart developers, and undoubtedly the people working for Facebook are probably some of the smartest developers out there, want big problems to solve, and I wonder with suspense, is that a problem for the majority of people? It certainly, I think it's fascinating what suspense offers, but I would maybe, it's certainly probably very, very, very appropriate for Facebook, but not everybody. Certainly, I'm not the applications I work on certainly are slightly less than Facebook scale. So with hooks, the thing with hooks is there's nothing comparable that I've ever seen on the landscape. I've never seen a function that's a hook function or they're not called stateless components anymore because they've got lots of state.
Yeah.
in TypeScript terms are called functional components now. I think it's just for anybody new coming on board, I think it's quite a shift to go from ordinary functions to having to deal with these very, very stateful. We now have, there's the use ref as well, which is now coming into, so a use ref is similar to use state, only it doesn't cause a re-render of the function. So you're having to deal with all these new concepts just really for, on the surface, it's very complicated. I mean, there's a good article about using use state, using a set timeout to update a counter, and they've got use state, they've got all these input, these hooks in the example. It's really a very, very, very complicated code. If we're having to, that requires a good knowledge of React hooks, which somebody new is not going to have. So again, anybody coming new to React is going to have to learn some pretty advanced topics to make this work.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting is that we're starting to see some kind of hidden concepts that you'd kind of accidentally learn over the course of your development life. You'd learn these concepts and then you'd apply them, and it just wouldn't be a front of mind concept. And it seems like one of the things that they're doing is trying to clarify the concept and force us to think about and deal with those concepts earlier on. It's kind of like way more complexity, but it's also kind of forcing us to think about that complexity ahead of time, even though you might not be at a place in your career, new people especially, where that concept is relevant, but then you're still having to learn about it anyway. But the potential good side there is that it's kind of setting us up to solve higher level problems in the future. And I think that kind of thing is like, I haven't really thought a lot about that in particular, but it's something that intrigues me.
I'm a consultant, and I was on site, and I was dealing with somebody who was testing a hook, and the hook had gone into an infinite render cycle because of this now infamous dependency array. It was a new function being passed in, and he was on the verge of just saying, this is ridiculous. I'm testing something very simple here. Why is this happening? And we dug in and we found it was because it was an arrow function being passed into the dependency array, which was obviously a new function each time. So it was blitzing and going into But I think people might just give up and say, this is not, why is this so difficult? And then I was on an Angular contract at the beginning of the year, and I found that really overly complicated to do simple things. Although I do have a React bias, so I've definitely got a cognitive bias towards React. But I was just amazed at how overly complicated or needlessly complex Angular was. So I haven't used Vue, so maybe you try React and you think this is just too hard. You go to Vue, it's simpler. What are you going to do? You want to get stuff done, you're going to choose Vue. That would be sort of my concern. I maybe could be wrong about this, but if it's hard to do easy stuff, you might just turn away.
Yeah, and I want to jump back about with the complexity, and then Thomas's point about kind of these new features kind of presenting new options to newer developers, like the concurrent mode offering, multiple renders and giving you that option of allowing your whole page to render at once when you have a huge list instead of waiting for a fetch. So as a beginner coming in, you're just trying to figure out what an arrow function is, and here, multiple renders is kind of pretty wild, I do think that some of these new things do give you tools to solve complex problems, but at a point, it's starting to kind of feel black box-ish, where we have these really complex problems being solved, and we have this nice sugar to handle it. So, like when you're on site, Paul, and you're able to utilize these tools, do you work with newer developers, kind of teaching them, or is it more just kind of you have like a scope that you're just trying to complete?
Both. I mean, this was a couple of contracts ago. I was dealing with newer developers, and that was one particular example springs to mind was the arrow function triggering the infinite re-render. They are good concept. Certainly there is actually because of the how often it comes up, there is actually a name as the stale closure pattern is what is known in React. If you do a search on Google, you'll find lots of people complaining about just this. So these are good things to learn, but again, I mean, what if you can't solve it? What if there's nobody about who can solve it? What do? Do you give up?
Yeah, the still closure, I was reading about that too. And unfortunately, one of those things where you run into it and you bang your head against the wall for 2 or 3 hours and you kind of seek out that answer. But these, obviously we're kind of standing on the shoulders of others. And so now we're having new, more complex problems, which are good problems to have. But, it is an interesting kind of landscape that React's moving in, especially with this concurrent mode. And kind of now, we're kind of thinking about the user experience more ever than we were before. So I'm excited to see what happens.
But you make a good point. Like, what do you do when things inevitably go wrong? Like, how do you find out where you went wrong? How do you fix it? Like, I remember, MooTools back in the day, the opinion of all the MooTools core people was that all of our APIs should just be as flexible as possible, just handle all inputs in the most intelligent ways, and we'll never throw an error. So you can totally rely on this thing to totally be safe, except then you don't know where you screwed up. You don't know when you screwed up.
Yeah,
it was so hard to learn. And early React was really, really good at that, of like, don't forget you need to use a key when you put things in an array or whatever. Like all the standard React warnings that kind of forces you onto the golden path just by complaining and nagging you. But it seems like kind of the simplicity of hooks has squeezed the complexity somewhere else, and the complexity has moved over into the learning process of discovering the concept of the stale closure, whatever. Like, how do you know about that? Like, I don't think React can just complain at you on the console about stuff like that.
Not if it's got an infinite re-render. That's what I would think. If you get an infinite re-render in production and your UI thread freezes, like, you're going to have a deep fear of maybe it's a good deep fear to have. But it's something like that gets triggered in production and your whole UI thread freezes and your browser freezes for your users. I mean, it's a pretty bad thing to happen. Like, I hope it should get caught before it goes to production, but things like this do happen. That's sort of. I mean, on the whole, I am actually in favor of hooks, but yeah, it's just the gotchas. That's the unforeseen gotchas, and they're very subtle. They're not blatant. The linter if you're using hooks, you definitely should be using the linter. Yeah, that will do its best to keep you in the straight and narrow, but it also it's included things for me that's not always is the right thing. Like, so you do not trust it implicitly, I guess.
That's hard. I love a linter. I think it kind of might make me a little lazy. I have that and Prettier set up, and I press save and my code looks good. But I think with the hook stuff, it did kind of. There's like a specific ESLint rule for that dependencies array.
Yeah, so you don't have to.
And so I think in your article you actually. Oh no, go ahead. Yeah, because I know you have to actually escape it. I can't remember what the name of the rule though.
It's exhaustive dependencies. I can't remember offhand, but you don't have to have. So with ESLint, you don't have to. If you pass --fix, it will do its best to. If that rule has a fix for it, it will do it. But you don't. If you want to stay skeptical, it'll just throw an error when you run compile. When you run ESLint, so --fix is definitely optional. I have it set up in VS Code, and I maybe have an npm script for it. But it definitely is optional. I would definitely not advise using hooks without it. But maybe you're right. Maybe if you want to be aware of why it's what it's telling you, then just don't run ESLint with the fix switch.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give you full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open source Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat@sentry.io.
As far as like things that help these days, so we've got the linter with the automatic fixing. That's pretty awesome. A lot of people are using TypeScript and Flow and stuff like that help a lot to kind of help us learn things as we go. There's like the runtime warnings and errors and stuff to help us to use things properly. And then I guess if none of that stuff helps and we're still running into things like infinite renders, I guess the only thing that you can do is turn to other humans and ask for advice. So like, where's a good place for that? I mean, Twitter used to be the way, but it seems like Twitter has gotten super toxic these days. It's kind of hard to...
It always has been. It always has been in some respects. Yeah, I mean, I suppose do you then push? I mean, they say in the docs that in the future that maybe things like the dependency array will be pushed to the framework, which sounds great. But then, as you mentioned, mood tools, and I found with Angular, I didn't. So with Angular, Angular will do a lot of magic, I would call it, if you if you don't tell it not to. You can actually set things to React a one-way push. I can't remember what change detection. I can't remember what it's called. One-way push, or else it will take care of trying to bind everything and just you can hit into performance problems. So that would be the ideal solution. Would be to React takes care of these things for you, but who knows what will that would bring up other problems. So I guess you're really in the land of Stack Overflow if you can't find a knowledgeable person on hand. GitHub issues, these aren't GitHub, these aren't like things you put on GitHub issues because.
But they're all also things like Reactive Flux, the online community.
Yes,
I remember back in the MooTools days, IRC chat was really helpful.
I think if you do want to get help, I think the important thing is to create a code sandbox is amazing. I mean, if you want people to help you, you need to go to the trouble of creating a reproducible problem, not just help exclamation mark bugs with a Z. Don't do that. Yeah, that's not a nice way.
My app's broken. It's your fault.
I've got a deadline tomorrow or something. Yeah, you need to be able to somebody to take a quick look there and then, and not just waving your hands around saying, "Help me, I'm drowning." A reproducible problem. I will happily look at anything, but trying to describe it with a few lines of text, I'm not going to really be that receptive to any sort of question like that. So ask your question well, you'll get a good answer. Ask a good question, you'll get a good answer.
That is a very good pro tip of just like learning how to ask questions well is probably one of the best tools that a developer can learn in order to level up.
Years ago, when I did .NET, there was no package manager for .NET, so I had to go create my own, and I was stunned by some of the rudeness of some of the GitHub issues I got with people saying, "How dare you? How dare you supply something that doesn't work on my Linux, whatever." I can't remember what the Linux what was called in .NET. They had like a Linux version as well. I think people complain about that, but not even complain, just really rude. How dare you spend hours creating this and it doesn't work in my...
How dare you give me this thing for free?
Yeah, how dare you?
You're not helping us right.
Yeah, so don't do that. It was really eye-opening. Like, so you've got one or two maintainers open source. Don't be rude.
I was going to say, you invented NuGet? But
no, I did. No. I can't throw that one at me. Like, I had something much worse. I had something much worse. Which maybe I'd like to think maybe that it gave them a prompt that they actually needed something to gain some traction. I got to go to Redmond and speak about it. About 2008 or something. So it did, but then NuGet came along and rightly was much better. But it was just amazing that some of the abusiveness, the rudeness of people. I really shouldn't be surprised, but I was.
I should look this up. Does Create React App, the new version, come with ESLint configure? Because I know there's some ESLint rules in there. Are the hook rules in there now?
I don't know if I don't use Create React App, but that's a good. It should. It definitely. Yeah. TSLint does, and it's now you can configure for TypeScript and stuff. Yeah, TSLint's dead. So I'm a big TypeScript fan. So there was the same rules for TSLint, but they were a bit flaky.
TSLint is dead.
I don't know if it's been deprecated. It's not being maintained anymore.
Huh.
Oh no.
What replaced it?
ESLint. Everything's going. There's like there's an add TypeScript scope in npm.
Oh, sweet. That's good. I like, you don't want to have. I mean, competition is good, but at the end of the day, it's just like, let me just pick one thing, please.
Yeah, but TSLint was always a bit of a poor man's ESLint as well. It wasn't never quite as good. So yeah, that's been good to unify that.
Yeah, when I worked with TSLint about 2 years ago in a Node app, and I really enjoyed it. I thought, but it was, I didn't really feel, I mostly work with ESLint now, and it all kind of feels relatively similar. There's no learning curve there. So the transition from TSLint to ESLint hopefully shouldn't be too bad.
How do you deal with change in general? Like that, I think that's the one constant in our industry. It's just like everything is constantly changing.
Yeah, that's when I worked in Ember. Again, it might be better now. And Angular as well. I just seem to be burning client money, upgrading the app. Or Ember was ridiculous. Ember, same as Angular, they basically didn't like the way 1.0 turned out, so they basically threw it all out apart from the version number. I went from 1 to 2, and after that, I even went as I was in an Angular contract not so long ago, and even you're looking at Google for bugs and stuff, and this works in Angular 4, but that's why again was one of the good things about React is even hooks are new. They're a new API. They haven't blitzed the existing landscape. They haven't done a scorched earth on what was there before, and that's another drawing point of React. I learned a lot from that Ember application. Programming suddenly became really, really difficult. Even the simplest things were insanely difficult, which again, I went to React and things were nice. But that's, again, a good choice. One thing I would like to is, we haven't really done well, is being able to reuse components across Angular, React, Vue, or whatever. Like, it would be good if we had something like web components that would take care of the sort of leaf, the actual sort of HTML elements themselves. Like, it would be good. I'm still really searching for a good way of doing it. That's always my thought, if we could use the web components, but they sort of do.
Yeah, I tried that. It didn't go so good.
I tried the presentational container pattern, and by the time I get to my presentational, I feel like I just have this massive object that's just configuring all the props for how I want my UI to look, and it just feels like one small pure function that's getting this God object.
Yeah, that's a bad pattern.
Yeah, it is. So I don't know. That's so. Well, again, choose if you're going to use one of these frameworks, choose one which isn't in constant flux, and that certainly ruled out my experience of Ember and Angular, for that matter. So yeah, so I really like the way React went from version to version, and they very rarely it was backwards compatible. Yeah, so if you can choose something that's backwards compatible and not prone to change.
And even when they do introduce some changes, there's always a code mod of like, here, run this code mod. It'll let you transition everything over, but you don't have to. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, trying to make things good. A lot of these haven't used Ember, Angular, and React, and a lot of the patterns, the good patterns, do. I mean, I like the try and keep things declarative in all these things. Like, I don't try and imperatively update. It's all, to me, it's the UI is just one giant state machine where we have action. But in Ember, they actually have a pattern for this called action. It's called actions up and render down or something like that. And
that's a good pattern.
Yeah, so you're pushing things to a higher level, and then the store, for want of a better word, is what is more Redux thing is. The store then takes care of changing state.
It's got the same kind of pattern as, render down and actions up. Is like,
that's
you're not listening to the results of your actions. You just, fire and forget.
Yeah, I was totally burned by the observable pattern in Ember like that. That's when it just suddenly became an absolute mess of where I just have no idea what was triggering what. Again, great for demo. So it's really good for demo. Look at this. Look at this. I changed this. This updates to a binding. Everyone's great. What could possibly go wrong?
My favorite question.
3 months into a real application, oh my God, how did I get here? This is chaos. I've heard people argue about, say, what is wrong with two-way data binding?
Have you tried it?
What are these things? What are they doing that I didn't do? Why, how could you possibly say this is good? Yeah.
My latest obsession is like complexity management of like trying to make the actual kind of leaf nodes or the micro components that are so idiot stupid. They don't do any kind of hooks. They don't do any kind of fanciness. They just they take these minimal props, like 2 or 3 props. They render out some HTML or UI if it's React Native or whatever, and move all the complexity to a higher level component that then composes everything together.
Yeah, that was a game where there was none of this. There was no real concept as such of that's container components, and that there's sort of big container components. Again, a lot of it was led by Redux, where you would maybe often unnecessarily have a component which didn't do anything UI related. It just had it was just a Redux Connect component that reacted to state changes and pushed props down to the leaf components. And again, that's a great pattern that you should use in other places as well.
Yeah. It's something that needs to be a team decision. Mistake I keep seeing happen is like people or teams will start developing stuff without making decisions about how they want to architect stuff. And so you have 20 different patterns in the same app of this person uses micro components. This one has, connect in every single component, or they have one like massive, 3,000 line UI component that has like, it's doing fetches and it's like connecting to 3 different data stores. Like, okay.
Yeah. I guess there's been a stampede as well to rewrite everything to hooks as well. That's been, which, I mean, developers are going to do this. And what are you going to do? You introduce a new pattern. Of course, you're going to rewrite your app to try it out, but there really has been a massive stampede, and anything with class components is sort of deemed now uncool. We shouldn't use that. We're not going to use it because it's just using those horrible, dirty class components that we should never use. That's not cool. And people would talk about us if we use them.
I think it's funny that just the whole approach, right? Class components aren't going away as far as I've heard. Am I wrong about that? Or
no, they're not going anywhere.
They're just not cool.
They're just not cool anymore.
Right.
You want to be one of the cool kids, you got to use hooks.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm loving the discussion on how to stay current and things like that as well. And just thinking about it, it's tough sometimes because I've seen things come out the way that hooks did in other communities and they just fall flat, right? And so you never know either, it's like, okay, I'm going to get up on this, and then, okay, turns out I really liked it, but nobody else did, or things like that too. So you have to weigh that out as well.
Yeah, and also, when you rewrite stuff, you're also rewriting. For going from class to hooks is a big rewrite, so you're potentially going to throw away a lot of bug fixes in your haste in your stampede to get the new and shiny out. You're always run the risk of throwing it away. If you don't have adequate test coverage, you're going to run the risk of throwing away all those bug fixes you got over the years with new and shiny. This is always a risk as well. Yeah, you're definitely not obliged to rewrite your entire application to hooks.
That's why when hooks came out, and my first experience with them was in contracts. I was by myself, so I kind of got to go probably a little bit crazier than I should have because I loved it. That's what I really liked about your article, is because, when you see the cons of something, it kind of, helps you kind of take into account how to handle these problems. So, whenever, in terms of staying current, whenever you're excited about something, I think it's always a good point to try to find the pros and cons of it instead of just embracing one side.
It's also, if you need a good sort of something which is you need to try it out in something real. Again, all the examples now have settled on the counter example for increment and decrement actions. That's not going to really flush out what it's all about. You need something good. That's always a challenge. If you have something you're passionate about, a side project that is as real as possible, that's a good way of flushing a lot of this. Because if you're just not going to experience it. I didn't experience it from the sort of quick hacks around I have with it. It's only in a production app with the pressures of a production project the real gotchas that I experienced come out. I don't think they're just not going to come out any other way.
Yeah, and the danger of rewrites is always super bad, like throwing away bug fixes, like that sort of thing. That's one of the reasons I love React so much, is the backwards compatibility of you can use hooks and they recommend use it in your new stuff, but it's so hard to tamp down that enthusiasm and kind of stop people from rewriting everything from scratch now that, there's some new fancy flavor of the month. And I'm seeing the same thing is going to happen with concurrent mode. It's going to be day zero and people are like, let's throw away everything. And like, calm down.
Yeah, I know. It is. So also, it's you're not obliged. You don't have to do this. Like there's no you're not suddenly. The thing for open source though is interesting because people will be turned off now if there's so a really good open source library. If it doesn't have hooks, people will go for something which has not been through the mill,
true,
which is newer, which will be open to bugs just purely because it has the magic hook ingredient. Whereas for something which has been around longer, which has got a larger user base, will be less prone to error than something new and shiny, unfortunately. But yeah, it's got hooks, so we gotta jump at the hooks.
Sometimes I've seen people get into trouble by avoiding the popular thing. You know, I was one of the people that I always liked the underdog. You know, I chose MooTools instead of jQuery. Of course, I had to do the less popular one. Now with React being so popular, it's like I feel conflicted. It's like, am I allowed to use the thing that's so popular? Like,
what's what is the MooTools in the MVC JavaScript framework? Then what is it? Vue? Is that
Vue is the new underdog in the UI wars. It's Angular is small, but it's not cool. It's like Angular is like the Java of the UI frameworks. It's like
the bundle size isn't small. The bundle size isn't small. That's for sure. Like it's gigantic.
Yeah, it kind of appeals to the same audience, kind of. And React is kind of weird. It's like it doesn't really. I mean, if you squint and you look throughout all the history of technology, there's always been, the same kind of dynamics at play. There's the large kind of boring thing that everybody uses, and then there's the small thing that people are kind of passionate about. It's like Java versus Ruby on Rails back in the day, and then it switched over to JavaScript, and then it was JavaScript versus not JavaScript, and then JavaScript was the thing, and it was just jQuery versus MooTools, and then with the bigger frameworks, it was Dojo versus Sencha or whatever. And then it's like, it's that kind of pattern over and over again. And it seems like everybody needs there to be a second thing.
There does. There needs to be rivalry, yeah. I don't think there is adequate rivalry. I mean, it's never sat entirely well with me that all this JavaScript running in the browser and rendering the HTML alphabet, just something tells me this is very wrong. I know we've got code splitting, but to me, it really is better that it should be certainly for accessibility. It should be rendered. It should be server side rendered. It should work with it should work with all clients, and it doesn't. But we're really far down the path of this. I've done some server side rendered React, and it is not simple. I mean, you can use Next.js. I think it's too opinionated, and I don't like. I don't like the routing. I don't like how I have to do CSS with Next.js. But if to set it all with Webpack, server-side rendering is not a simple matter. It's going to prolong, and it's easier to go to production sooner with just bundling static files than it is to have a fully fledged isomorphic application. And I wish it was easier. I know there was some terrible. There was, what was it called then? Turbolinks in Ruby on Rails. And then there's Elixir's got its own sort of way now. I was against SoundScript, but I still don't think we're there. So I sort of wish it would swing a bit more back to the server. This has just always felt wrong that we're pushing large, massive.
It feels like it's coming back to that. Like Gatsby is a great way to like get some of that right now in a really, really simple way. But it's not, you're not going to use Gatsby for just like some giant SaaS application or whatever. But for what they try to do, they do it really, really well. I haven't really played with Next as much as I'd like to. And I feel bad because, I love Guillermo. He's an old MooTools guy from back in the day,
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Yeah. No, it really is.
He was trying to tell all of us like how great Node was going to be, and we're like, whatever. Like I should have listened.
Yeah, it's also quite so. I mean, hooks don't really render in suspense. I can't remember if it works in server-side rendering now, but it's still very inefficient the way server-side rendering works. You fire all the bundle to the server and then you rehydrate everything. So it's computationally very heavy. So again, the pattern isn't there yet, and to hook it all together is I think if somebody maybe could come up with the same sort of development experience as React in the to when you're rendering in the browser, if that can be all done from the server in a sort of less opinionated way than Next.js, then I think that would be I would lean towards something like that. Because if you want to do a PWA, progressive, if you want to use progressive enhancement, then it's not easy and it adds a lot of time onto your project and money onto your project. So it's prohibitive for a number of reasons. Yeah, I like the sound of the Elixir, I can't remember what it's called, live update or something like that. But then when I actually dug into it, it sort of reminded me of turbo links on Ruby on Rails, which was much maligned.
In terms with Next, I just messed around with it a little bit in a course too. With your experience, did you actually do a deployment with it, or how was it?
No, so I didn't. I have gone live with a server-side render React app, but I ended up I started out with Next. I just at the time I really didn't like the routing. You couldn't have dynamic properties. This is a long time ago. This is a couple of years ago. You couldn't have dynamic properties in the routing. So there was things. It was really. It's probably, I'm sure they must have that now, and you had to use a certain. I'm not a huge fan of CSS and JS, probably because I'm old. I know a lot of the kids like it, but I still like Sass. I like my CSS to look like CSS, and you were at that time again. Like I think you can use Sass now. You had to sort of use. I can't remember which one it was. You were really pushed on using one of the CSS and JS things. It was just a number of because they clearly stayed up front. It's an opinionated framework, and there were some of the opinions I just found were more pain that I was prepared to put up with. So I went by my own path of so I could use React Router and the stuff I knew already, and I could reuse code from other projects. But I went down the path of doing the Webpack and stuff myself. But it was quite a learning curve to get that all hooked up. So I didn't go live with Next.js, but it's popular. I think it's the only show in town really there was after JS, which I had a couple of commits, a few commits into their repo, but I think it's been abandoned. I can't think if there's a better competitor to Next.js yet. I can't think of one offhand. It seems to be the only show in town. I just don't agree with some of the opinions that they're a bit too opinionated.
The new Facebook.com is doing some interesting things where they're like shipping down the relevant JavaScript with the data so that you have the code necessary to render the data whenever you get the data. Now, that's kind of an interesting pattern. I don't know if anybody's like...
It's Relay. It's all baked into Relay, I think. So that at the minute it's all in Relay. Yeah, there is. They have some. It's very, very interesting stuff. But again,
I used old Relay and like medium Relay. I haven't used the new Relay yet.
A lot of these patterns are great if you're at Facebook scale, but very, very few projects are. Again, as developers, and myself included, you're inclined to try and want to do all this for maybe an application that might not need it. You introduce a lot of complexity for anything for maybe an application which is a hundredth of or thousandth of a Facebook scale. Do you really need to have that level of optimization? Like you're introducing a whole bunch of complexity that maybe is just not necessary.
Yeah, I think that kind of comes back to that concurrent mode. I mean, I think I've only done a little bit of reading. I'm not an expert by any means. But when you kind of read through it, you could just feel that this is a problem Facebook has, so how can we leverage that to help on our smaller scale? So, it should be a useful tool to have, but I'm wondering if concurrent mode is going to have some of the same kind of issues we ran into with hooks, like you said, with the dependency issue with the array.
Yeah, anything asynchronous is generally involves weird problems because weird latency issues. Anything with latency is going to cause issues. I've worked on enough projects that use Selenium to know that Selenium's main problem is the fact that things don't run synchronously. If things run synchronously, Selenium would be a great end-to-end testing framework, but it's not because it's got to wait for the DOM to be in a state, or it's got to wait for certain animations to finish before it can run the search, and that just leads to a whole pile of problems. So yeah, anything async will not always behave as you expect. And certainly suspense is very much in the async realm.
Have you ever felt like JavaScript is just everywhere? Well, we have. We actually had a conversation on JavaScript Jabber about what you can build with JavaScript. We've also talked about what JavaScript is and how we're inspired by the language. If you're interested in JavaScript or are doing web development, then you definitely need to check out JavaScript Jabber. You can find it at javascriptjabber.com.
So picks is where at the end of our show, we talk about something that we want to give somebody as a takeaway. Usually it's a recommendation of some more stuff to consume, or sometimes it is a pro tip or whatever. Chris, you're new here. Would you like to take it?
Yeah. So Netlify's blog has a deep dive on how do the React hooks really work. And they walk you through a small clone of the React hook implementation. And it kind of discusses some of the things we talked about today, the struggle with closures and the still closure state. So I definitely think that's a major opportunity, and it's a great resource. So I definitely recommend that. My second pick's more of an item. I just got the AirPod Pros, and I was really on the fence. My wife and boss kind of talked me into it. And if you are going to work from home and you need a headset, they're awesome. The noise canceling is a lot better than I expected. So those are my picks.
Nice. All right. C-dubs, you're up.
All right. I've got a couple of picks. I think this goes out in 2 weeks. It might be more. I'm releasing a book next week as we speak.
Oh, wow.
On Amazon. So if you're... Thanks. So anyway, if you're looking for a job, or if you are thinking that you might need a little bit of job mobility, then this book walks you through essentially finding companies that are a good match for you and then positioning yourself so that you can get noticed by them. Because what I found is that it's much easier to get a job if you already know somebody at the company, even if you've only met them a few times, than it is if you send your resume in through the regular channels and then hope they get around to whatever pile of resumes they wind up with. And so this walks you through doing it the other way.
That's a good timing. We need this book right now.
Yeah. So, well, I've had a ton of people ask me about how to do this. I've coached a dozen or so people through it. And that's when I wrote the book, because I was like, these folks really need this. So I'm putting the book together. Spoiler, I'm also putting together a course. So if you buy the book, there'll be information on how to get the course, or you can just go to maxcoders.io and I'll have information on there. So yeah, a little bit of self-promotion there. And then we're heading into the Christmas season, and I've got a couple of favorite movies that I'm going to pick. I'm going to pick a whole bunch more on JavaScript Jabber. So if you're not listening to that show and you do JavaScript, which I'm going to assume most of our listeners do, then go listen to those, because I'm going to pick a whole bunch more over there.
Can you pick another podcast on this pod? That's so...
No, I'm just saying I'm not always here. And you don't want to miss out, right? So anyway, the first pick that I have, so these two movies both had James Stewart in them. Classic movies. The first one is It's a Wonderful Life. It's an old movie, so people have probably already seen it. But yeah, it kind of leads up. You get the story of his life, and then he's standing on a bridge getting ready to jump off, and his guardian angel shows up and then shows him what it would have been like if he'd never been born. It's a terrific movie. Just love the movie. I was actually doing some digging, and it turns out that it was kind of a box office flop when it came out. And then it's become one of the most beloved movies ever. So fun stuff. But yeah, definitely check that out. And then the other movie that I'm going to pick, it also has James Stewart in it, or Jimmy Stewart. I've heard him called both. It's called Mr. Kruger's Christmas. And it's a much less well-known movie. And it's basically this sad old custodian. Anyway, you kind of see him lonely, and he has daydreams about, what Christmas is and what it could mean. And you kind of see people relate to him, and, you realize that Christmas is about more than just, how big your tree is and things like that. It's about the people. And yeah, essentially anyway, it's a terrific movie. So I'm gonna just recommend that people go check that out as well.
Okay, I guess I'm up. Tough to follow, but let's see. I'm gonna pick a physical item. I just got. It's called Shada. It's a lost Doctor Who adventure by Douglas Adams, the guy who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And guy Gareth Roberts turned the TV episode script into a book that feels very much like a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy era kind of book. And it is so far very hilarious if you need a break from coding related things. And now, Paul, you got any picks for us?
I would like to, again, this is self-promotion, is my follow-up to frustration was solutions to frustrations with React Redux. And because the comments I got in the original order were so good, and they actually did change my mind. So I would like to point people that it does go back to this, keep React declarative. That if you can gain that mindset, I think you'll get into a lot less problems with React. The second pick is, I guess, is to stay fit. I just had my first MMA fight at 50. So I've shed 3 stone and I'm a shadow. I'm much improved, transformed from this time about 12 months ago. So we sit on our bottoms all day. I certainly did this time last, but now I'm sort of addicted to fitness again. Like, and it's really improved my well-being and all around. So yeah, we need to be more fit. That's my second pick.
That reminds me, I need to up my my standing desk.
Oh, there you go. He moved it up. He feels less guilty now. By the way, for those of you who are ignorant Americans like I am, 3 stone is about 42 pounds.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of stone.
Thank you, Google. Did the conversion for me.
Yeah, I was forgetting of the different...
yeah, congratulations, man. That's a huge achievement.
Yeah.
It is, yeah, it is. I didn't win the MMA fight, though. That's the only downside.
I'll give him next time.
Yeah, keep practicing. Punch harder.
Exactly.
All right, I think that about wraps it up for React Roundup this week. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
And scene.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.